My name is Michael, and I'm the Inside Communications Director for Human San Quentin. The contents of this episode include strong language and graphic descriptions of violent crimes that may include sexual assault. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
Hello, and welcome back to the Prison Podcast. I'm your host, Diane Kahn, and we're so glad to have you with us today. In this episode, we'll be speaking with Michele, a woman whose life was forever changed by the tragic loss of her husband. For years, she lived with a distorted version of the events surrounding his death, leaving her and her family consumed by anger and grief. But everything shifted when Michele made the brave choice to meet her husband's killer, Stephen, face to face. This powerful confrontation brought the truth to light, offering Michele the answers she had long sought and setting her on a path toward healing and reconciliation. So today I feel honored to sit down with Michele, and Michele's husband was one of the victims of a violent crime, and her offender, Stephen, is in a prison in California. So we're honored to sit down with her today. Michele, thank you for telling us your story.
No problem.
So I know you've told me quite a bit, but I would love to hear about everything that's happened. I'm not sure what that question is or where you are in the process of wanting to talk about it. So I'll lead it up to you.
I've been talked about it with no problem. I've never had a problem talking about it.
Do you mind starting from the very beginning? Say when you maybe first found out that he was killed?
I was in the front yard, raking the yard, and all of a sudden some officers showed up and he was on probation or parole. And honestly, I thought they were there to tell me that he was being arrested again for something stupid. And that wasn't the case at all. They told me that they were from homicide, and they had to tell me that 3 times, and I still didn't comprehend that what they were telling me. So they finally had to tell me that he'd been murdered, and I didn't know how to react. It was devastating. He was my 6th grade boyfriend. We'd been together forever. By then, we were married 22 years. So it was a lot to take in. And then I had 4 kids, too. 2 of them were already moved out, but 2 of them were still at home. One of them was 4, the other one was 9. And my daughter, the 9-year-old, overheard the officers talking to me about her dad being killed. And she ran inside and she just wanted to go to her grandma's. So she called her grandma, and my brother came over and picked her up to take her over there. And it was a roller coaster from then. We were told from the beginning that he was murdered for the bike after they found out about the bike. Because I asked them where the bike was, and they said that they didn't see no bike. And so I had to describe the bike to the detective and get all the details about it, but we didn't have the numbers from the bike off of it. So they didn't really have anything permanent to go by on identifying the bike. Although one of the officers was a bicycle cyclist at downtown area for a while. So she was really familiar with the different bikes and stuff. And she got it right to the T. She knew exactly what bike I was talking about. But when I told them that there was a blue light on the back of it, and she asked me at least 4 times, "Are you sure that light was blue?" And I told her, I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "How are you so sure?" I said, "Because I've never seen another blue light on the back of a bike. It's always been red." And she finally later told me that the reason she kept asking that was because the only blue lights that she's ever seen were on officers' bikes. And there was only one place in downtown Sac that you could get them. And evidently my husband knew where it was because he had one. So she said that might help make it a little bit easier to find. But there's a lot of bikes in downtown Sacramento when you're looking for one. I was beginning to think we would never see the bike again. I figured it was at the bottom of the river or something, but it wasn't. They finally found it. 2 officers stopped at a scene of a car wreck, and there was posters everywhere downtown for this bike with the picture of it and everything. And a pedestrian pulled up next to him and told them, "There goes the bike you guys have been looking for." And so one of the officers left the scene to go find the bike, and he went inside of a thrift store, and the officer followed him in there. And I guess he put the bike on the rack in the thrift store. And he said as soon as he walked in, he could tell that bike did not belong in there. And he walked over to it and he asked whose bike it was, and Stephen claimed it as his own. And they took him outside and patted him down. And the first time he said he patted him down, he didn't find no knife on him, but he said that he patted him down a second time when he's putting him in the car and found the knife that he killed my husband with. But then to prove that it was the bike, my husband used to wax the bike every night when he'd get home from riding it, spoke by spoke. And I'd go and I'd watch him wax it. So to try to identify the bike, they picked up all the rags that he used to wax the bike with. And then I remembered that there was handlebar pieces that my husband cut to make the bike more narrow so he could go through more narrow spaces. The only reason I knew that's because my youngest son, he was 4, was trying to talk his dad into letting him have one of his rings because he had gold rings on every finger. And my husband told him no and tried giving him one of those handlebar pieces to put him off. And he got mad, came storming in the house, pouting, telling me that daddy's being mean. So I went out to see what he's talking about and found out that my husband had cut the handlebars more narrow. And that's how I knew about the handlebar pieces. So I gave those to the officers. And that's how they identified the bike, was they matched up to the bike cuttings on the bike. So it was really weird.
You told me earlier when he was arrested that he didn't realize that he had killed anybody. Will you go into that for us?
Yeah. Stephen said that when they arrested him, he had no clue that he'd taken somebody's life. And he told them then that to just sentence him to death, and he would tell them everything they needed to know, that he took full accountability for it.
Did you ever consider Stephen's perspective?
I never thought about asking what happened because I thought I was pretty clear on what happened. My husband was gone and, he took the bike. But from what I understand after talking with Stephen, it wasn't about the bike. He said after the fight, he was panicking because people were running down there and he jumped on the bike and left. And that's how he ended up with the bike. But my husband was short and muscular, so he could always handle himself in a fight with no problem. But he had a complex with people thinking that they could get over on him because of his height. And so anytime somebody'd be looking at him hard, he would, "What, you got a problem with me? Well, let's handle it." And I'd seen him do it so many times in so many years that I knew that when I finally talked to Stephen, knew that my husband started that fight. The only difference is when my husband started getting the best of Stephen, he pulled out a knife and stabbed him. And that's how he ended up dead. So he's just as at fault as Stephen is, I think, looking back on it now. But it was a lot. It's like somebody took a security blanket away from me that I never even knew I had, because I'd always thought of myself as very independent. So much for independent.
And how long have you known him at that point?
Since the 6th grade. We just turned 40. So you figure 6th grade, you're what? About 11 or 12? So known him for a lot of years. I was together with him longer than I lived at my mom's house. So it was a lot. Yeah.
So what actually happened that day?
He went for a bike ride after work, just like he always did. And the officer showed up at my house at about 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. And I can remember being mad at my husband because he didn't come home and thinking, this is bullshit, because you just got done telling me that you weren't doing this. You weren't going to be staying out all night. And then he did it again. But yet he'd gotten mad at me when he first got home because I went to the casino and he wasn't with me and he didn't know where I was. And here he was turning around doing it right to me. But that wasn't the case at all.
How did he meet Stephen?
Just right there on the street. I guess Stephen was looking over his direction. And so my husband, I'm sure, said his same thing he always did, which was, "You got a problem with me, let's handle it."
And where were they?
They were in downtown Sacramento. I think it was K and 22nd. I'm not sure which street it was, but I know it was K. It was like 1 block away from the railroad tracks that are over there.
Was it in the middle of the night?
I think they said that he was killed at, it was either 1 or 2 a.m. It's kind of weird. My daughter woke up out of a dead sleep, my oldest daughter, at that same time that his time of death was. And she didn't know why. She just all of a sudden woke up. Took 4.5 years to get him to trial. And we thought that it was taking so long because he was playing games with the system, because postponements because of him. First, he fired his attorney and wanted to defend himself. And we thought it was because he was playing games with the system, but it wasn't. It was because nobody was listening to him. His attorney, nobody was listening. They were just trying to make the case about what they wanted to make it about to try to get a win. And he wasn't okay with that. They wouldn't put him on the stand. So he fired his attorney, and then he asked for a psych evaluation. And it was just one thing after another, to the point to where I started having panic attacks by the time we got to court, because I was afraid that it was going to be postponed again. But it had nothing to do with him playing games with the system. It had to do with him trying to get an attorney that would listen to him. And nobody seemed to want to listen to him or put him on the stand or even let him speak. Because I asked him when I had my meeting with him, why he didn't say something at the sentencing. He said that they told him he wasn't allowed to, that he needed to just sit there and be quiet, which is wrong.
What made you request the meeting with Stephen?
I spent 18.5 years with a lot of built up anger towards this man that I did not need to have. And it didn't matter to the court. Didn't matter to the court at all. They just wanted their win. And like I said, I never bothered asking what happened. It was pretty clear to me. He stole the bike and stabbed him, but that's not even the case.
That is a long time to sit with the story and for the hatred.
That it is, because by that point I had so much anger built up, but it was all towards Stephen. I don't go and take anger out on everybody, but I just needed that face to face. And when I requested the meeting, it was the beginning of the pandemic. So we ended up having to wait 2.5, 3 years before we even got to go to the meeting for the pandemic to lift. And by that time, I was just really over it, and I just needed the meeting to happen and to be over with. And my daughters kept trying to talk me out of it because they thought it was going to make me relive the murder all over again. And I told them, I said, well, you know what, it might. I said, but I feel like I need to do this. And I'm glad I did. It totally changed things, because I felt like I was not going forward, not going backwards. I was just sort of, just here. And it wasn't okay at all. It was not even close to being okay.
I think we'd all love to hear how it is you went from so much anger to get yourself to a point where you wanted to sit down with him face to face. So how did that process happen for you?
I was working at a convenience store in Roseville, and this lady used to come in and talk to me at night. And I knew that she could communicate with people that had passed. But the only thing she knew about my husband was that he had been murdered. That was it. I didn't know her before I started working at that store. And I have had no contact with her since I stopped working at this store. But she came in one night with a whole bunch of gifts for me. And she kept telling me, I don't know how to say this. And I told her, I said, you've never had trouble talking to me. Just tell me what you need to tell me. And she told me that my husband had come to her the night before and told her that she needed to bring all these gifts to me so that I would know that this message was really from him, and that I had to look at these things with my oldest son. So the things that she brought me, the first thing that we opened when we got home, my husband used to love weed, okay? And he loved playing Super Mario on TV when we first got together. He'd play Super Mario and be able to win that game with 100 men left. So the first thing we opened was a weed pipe with Super Mario on it. And my oldest son lost it. He just totally lost it. And he doesn't cry easily, but he lost it when he seen that. And he goes, Mom, you know what that is? And I didn't even connect it. And he told me, and everything that she gave me was from things in different times of our life that she had no idea of knowing. And so I had to believe that the message was from him. And she said that his message was that he needed me to either accept God in my life or forgive the guy that killed him. And I told her, I said, he could have asked anything else to me and it wouldn't have been a problem. But I decided there was no God when he was murdered. And there's no way, I'm just not that kind of person. I couldn't forgive him. It wasn't going to happen. And she said that there was urgency in his voice, the way he said it, that I needed to do this as soon as possible. Well, it was like a week away from his anniversary of his death. And I was trying to think of what I could do. So I decided that's when I came up with the idea to have the face-to-face meeting with Stephen. And so I got hold of victims of violent crimes and I requested the meeting. And she came back in a few days after that and she told me that he was able to cross over. So evidently making the appointment for the meeting was enough to give him what he needed. And I think now that I look back on it, I think his whole purpose of me doing that meeting was so that I would know the truth about what happened, so that I could get rid of all the anger, because that's what it did. And I told Stephen even at the meeting, I read a 13-page letter to him, telling him all about himself and about how much he's hurt the family and on and on and on. And him and his son and my first daughter, she was 9 when he was killed, but she was 18 when we went to court. And she was on whatever that thing was before Facebook. She was on there looking for friends, and his young son was too. And she said somebody came on and told her she looked really familiar. And he told her, yeah, she did too, but he didn't know why. She said he came back on 20 minutes later and asked her if she was in court a month ago. And she said as soon as he said that, she knew who he was. And the first thing out of his mouth was, well, don't hate me. I lost my dad the same day. And so throughout the years, that same son of his was murdered in Rancho Cordova over a girl. He was shot. And it took everything I had to not try to write to Stephen or something and tell him that was his karma. But I didn't, because of the fact that my daughter said he was a good kid. They would talk every once in a while. They never did meet up. And she told me that he was a really good kid. So I didn't want to put that on him. So I didn't. But I put it in my letter to him. And I told him, I said, no, I want you to have to sit here and think about the fact that you can't make this right with him because he's gone. I said, just like I couldn't make it right with my kids, that all they wanted was their dad. And I hope you sit there and think about that for the rest of your life. And I feel bad about that now because of finding out the truth. After I read the 13-page letter to him, and he read a letter that he'd addressed to me and my husband, apologizing. And in my letter, I told him I didn't want no apologies because it was way too late for that. If he wanted to apologize, he would have done it then. And after he read his letter, he asked if it was okay if he spoke freely. And I told him, I said, I don't care. Go ahead. I never did look him in the eyes until he said what he did. And he told me, he goes, it was never about the bike. And then he got my attention with that. And I looked at him and I said, he goes, it was never about the bike. It was about 2 male egos. And as soon as he said that, I knew it has started this fight. That's all there is to it. I knew it. And like my brother-in-law said, once he started getting the best of him, that's when Stephen pulled out the knife. And I told Stephen then, I said, I'll never forgive you. I said, but I understand it. I understand. And my husband's just as much to blame as you are. I said, I can't put all that blame on just you now. But it's like all of the anger that I had from all them years was just gone as soon as he said that. Even the officer in the room said that he could tell the difference in me. And he didn't even know me. He said he could see the difference in me, just like it was all released. And I even asked the officer if I could give Stephen a hug before he left, and I did. When the mediators went back into the other room to check on him before we left, he was standing there like in shock, saying she hugged me, like it just totally threw him. And I didn't expect to do that. The mediators even asked me at one point, what are you going to do if you like Stephen? I said, oh, you don't got to worry about that. That's not going to happen. There's no way. Well, I actually like Stephen. As weird as it sounds, like him. And if they would have listened to him too, he wouldn't have been doing life like he is. He probably would have gotten 20 years and been released. So I'm in the process of writing a letter to help try to get him released because he shouldn't be doing life. If they would have listened to him and tried him the way they should have, he would have been doing 20 years. It's time for him to go home. Just because my husband's gone doesn't mean I need to ignore that fact. It's time for them to let him go home, to be with his family for the rest of their life. I mean, that's all there is to it. And all my kids, I didn't think my oldest daughter would ever ask me about that meeting. I knew my youngest daughter would, but I knew it would take her a little while. But both my sons knew as soon as I got home later that night. Because when I got back from the meeting, I took them all out for dinner. But I didn't say one word about the meeting. And they were all sitting there wondering why I'm so happy in such good mood. And later on, my daughter tried getting a hold of my daughter-in-law because she lives with us. to see what happened in the meeting. And my daughter-in-law told her, you need to ask Mom. So she called me and asked me. And so I told her. And as soon as I told her, she goes, Mom, Dad started that fight. I said, I know. They all had the same reaction. Dad started that fight because they'd all seen him do it over and over again. Well, my oldest daughter, she finally asked me about 2.5 months later what happened at the meeting, what gave me such relief of my anger. So I told her, and her response was the same. Mom, he shouldn't be doing life. They shouldn't be doing it 20 years. I said, I know. She goes, Dad started that fight. I said, I know. But that's like my husband's way of getting me to know what really happened that night.
I would love for you to play out the day for me when you were going to go see him and what prison he was in and how you were feeling that day.
We went to breakfast and I looked at Martina and I said, is it wrong to want to have a drink right now? She goes, no, afterwards we will for lunch. I said, okay. I was nervous. I don't know. I was anxious to get it done because it had been so long and I just really wanted to get it done. And I don't even know why I was so anxious. I don't know if it'd been because it was been so many years I requested it, or if it was just, I thought it was going to give me complete closure and I wouldn't think of anything to do with the murder anymore. I don't know what it was, but I was just really anxious to get it done. When they brought him into the room, though, I got real quiet. I remember that. I got real quiet. And all the way there, in the ride there, Martina kept throwing different questions at me so that I would think of things in a different direction. And she asked me if that bothered me. And I told her, I said, no. I said, I like that. I like having somebody give me a new direction to think of things in case I haven't yet. And she kept telling me, because every time I talked to her, I'd end up crying. And she'd tell me, you need to learn to think of your husband outside of the murder, just with your memories. And I told her, I said, I don't know how to separate him from the murder anymore. It's been so long, I don't know how. That was the grand finale. And it's like all the rest of it it was there still, but it wasn't. It was like in the back row. And she told me kept telling me I needed to learn how to separate that. And I started crying and I told her, I said, I don't know how to separate it. I just don't.
How are you feeling about the VOD after it happened?
Well, as soon as we left that prison, I told her, I said, I know how to separate it now. It was easy. But before that meeting, I didn't know how. I couldn't do it. If you've ever lost somebody to murder, it's so different than losing somebody to illness. It's like you never know how to experience it unless you've gone through it. And it's just, you're not getting any answers. Come to find out, I never got any answers. But just everything evolving around it's making you more and more mad. I couldn't even cry at his funeral because I was so mad. But I couldn't watch him lower him into the ground either. I had to walk away. I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. I really wouldn't. Because it's like you feel cheated. You feel like somebody, and I told Stephen in the letter, I said, you took something that you had no right to take. It wasn't yours to take. It was my kids. That's where it really hit me hard, was when it came to my kids. And there's no way I could comfort them or make any of it easier because all they wanted was their dad. And that I couldn't give it to them. Couldn't even begin to try. And it just break my heart over and over again. I didn't know how to handle it. But, when something's thrown at you, you just get through it. And I feel like my entire life back then was just a big blur. I was just going through the motions. That's about it. I just don't even know how to explain it. It was definitely an experience.
How are you different now than when you were before you sat down with Stephen?
Oh, amazingly different. Since then, I have gone back to school. I will have my high school diploma in January, which I swore for years that I was going to do, and I never did do it, but it's almost here now. I went and got my license back, trying like hell to get a different job, because right now I'm working 7 days a week for 30 hours, and it's killing me. But I'm doing it. But, Yeah, my life is a lot different now. I'm not walking around mad all the time, and I don't really think I showed really any anger before, to be honest with you, but you'd have to ask other people that question, I guess, to see if they thought I was or not. But now, I mean, I've always been the kind of person that I couldn't stay mad at anybody. It just wasn't worth it to me. But I mean, Steve and I had no problem being mad at him. And now I can't really be mad at him neither. My husband had an equal part in that, and I told him, I said, I'll never forgive you, but I understand, but just because my husband's not here doesn't mean he should be punished in the wrong way, just don't feel like he should be.
How's your relationship with Stephen now?
I don't really have a relationship with him. I basically send messages to the theater, letting him know, tell him that if he needs anything to let me know. And I offered to write a letter to help get him his sentence overturned, because he shouldn't be in there. He just shouldn't be. From the minute he found out I wanted that meeting, he did everything he could possibly do to make sure I got everything I needed out of that meeting. And the day of the meeting, if he wanted to even get out of it, he could have, because they buried his grandson that day from a car wreck. And it had to have been hard for him to even be there because of that fact. You could tell that everything that he was saying was sincere, and that he honestly meant it from the heart. He honestly did do what he needed to do, because he never took any classes or nothing in prison the whole time he'd been there. And then he started taking classes to do everything he could to help me get what I needed out of it. And when I first told him I wanted the meeting, he asked him why. He goes, "Why should you want to hit me?" I said, "No, I don't want to hit you. I just need to release some anger." But if I was to go to that meeting now, knowing what I did, I would have never wrote the 13-page letter like I did, because I was being mean, very mean. But even my daughter said that I just probably really needed to release it, which is true too. And all I kept saying is, if they let me push the button on you, I would do it right now. Well, at the end of the meeting, I told him I wouldn't push the button on you. And he knew that's all I wanted, was to push the button on him.
And what do you mean when you say push the button?
To have him executed. And I would have gone and watched it too, up until that meeting. Anytime before that meeting, I would have gone and watched. But no, he needs to be home.
You're a really big person, Michele, to come away with so much healing and so much kindness and so much good for him. It's amazing to hear you say where you are and what you're willing to give to him. How was the realization for you when you found out that your husband was responsible as well?
It was hard to hear, but it totally made sense, because I'd always pictured Stephen not as an animal, but kind of, because I couldn't understand why you'd go and steal a bike and kill somebody for it, It just didn't make no sense to me. But yet I never asked what really happened. So I guess I believed it.
Michele's story is nothing short of remarkable. From initially advocating for Stephen's execution to now playing a pivotal role in his quest for freedom, her transformation is truly inspiring. It's a testament to the power of empathy, growth, and the human capacity for change. Thank you, Michele, for your courage in opening up about your experiences, your journey towards understanding, and your unwavering commitment to justice. Your willingness to share your story serves as a beacon of hope and reminds us all of the importance of second chances and redemption. Next week, we'll hear Stephen's perspective on his experience. Stephen is currently incarcerated in Mule Creek State Prison in California. His own struggle with addiction and shame over the years highlights the importance of these difficult yet essential conversations. If you or someone you know is interested in participating in a victim offender dialogue, we encourage you to reach out to your local Department of Corrections. If these services are not currently available in your area, consider advocating for their inclusion through your local representative. Join us for this powerful conversation, and remember, even in our darkest moments, healing is possible. and change is within reach. Be kind to yourself.